Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Scrollers podcast. We are resurrecting it after a several-month hiatus. I'm very excited. The topic that we're resurrecting it with is about reenchantment from the modern age to the present. I know it's a topic that a lot of you are very interested in, and I like to tackle it from a literature perspective, and I like to tackle it from a history perspective too. And I'm joined by Matt Skankenstein, and we are going to be talking to somebody that, I mean, honestly, if you're going to talk about a literary figure from the 20th century who bridged the divide between modernism and esoteric cults and let's just say the shadow and the light side of these sort of topics. I can't really think of someone better than Charles Williams to talk about, and I certainly can't think of anyone better to talk about it with than Dr. Sorina Higgins.
Thanks, Matt.
Yes. So Dr. Sorina is she's an editor, she's an author, English teacher, and writing consultant. You can hire her as a developmental editor or writing coach via wordhoard.com. So that link is in the show notes.
Thank you.
And she holds a PhD in English from Baylor University, and her scholarly interests include British modernism, magic, the Inklings, and Arthuriana. She also hosts a podcast and Substack called Words Do Things, which I can very much recommend to you guys, where she explores public rhetoric and the power of speech. The current series is on J.R.R. Tolkien, a fellow you may have heard of. It's on YouTube and wherever fine podcasts are streamed. So thanks for spending a bit of time with us, Dr. Sorina.
Oh, I'm glad to. Really looking forward to this conversation. It looks like it's going to go some directions I don't always get to go.
Oh, great. So segment one of this conversation, it's the turn of the 20th century. We've had a century of Orientalism to discover a reenchantment. We've done Blavatsky in Europe. We've done the Order of the Golden Dawn has already been explored. We're in a late stage of that phase. We've already done Romanticism, which may have been a precursor to that in some respects.
Spiritualism and mesmerism, two important threads. Yeah. Oh, you're muted, Matt.
Oh.
Unmute. No.
Oh my goodness.
There you go.
There we go.
So I said spiritualism and mesmerism, and the forces of the universe shut you up.
They absolutely did.
So what were you saying?
Then at the turn of the 20th century, we've got figures that start to say maybe we need to maybe the rot or the critique of modernism is something that is more embedded to the modern Western project, maybe, or maybe not. But they start to think maybe we need to develop a liturgy and a rite and a mysticism and a reenchantment that's Western, I suppose, right? Instead of just going to Tibet for these insights, maybe we need to develop them in the West. That's my like, I'm trying to draw a circle around some very different figures, including Yeats, Aleister Crowley, and Charles Williams. But that's my table setting. So I thought we could explore. What do you think about that, or how would you play with those
yeah, thanks for setting those things out there. I think we got a lot of important things in place. A lot of people like to throw around this disenchantment narrative or the secularization thesis, right? That as the human race becomes more industrialized and as it develops empirical sciences, then it throws out enchantment. It throws out religious narratives and fantastical narratives. And I think one can only tell that story by being highly selective. So I don't think there was a disenchantment, except in certain times, certain places, certain figures, to the exclusion of others. That there have always been writers, thinkers, and practitioners and teachers who have taken an enchanted view of the world. And maybe we could pause and say what we mean by that. We could mean that it's an animate universe, that things like animals and trees have something more of rationality or personhood. We could say that it means they're elemental spirits inhabiting natural things, or we could say that it's more of a traditional religious hierarchy of God and angels and demons, or we could simply say that it means humans have souls, that we are not purely a collection of material objects, right? So there are different ways we could talk about an enchanted world. So that's my first thing to add to the table setting is you can only get a disenchantment narrative by leaving a heck of a lot of stuff out.
That's great. That's great.
And I think some of the people that you pointed to were the ones who don't fit that disenchantment story. The other I would add is, interestingly, it was around the turn of the 20th century that a lot of the quote unquote Eastern thought was entering into these British orders and so forth. I don't know if A.E. Waite, for instance, who's an important liturgist, an important ritualist, I don't know if he was trying to create a Western narrative. He was trying to find the ritual that he thought existed behind all of these other individual ones. So he went around Europe getting himself initiated in every society he possibly could. He wrote in his diary or a letter, "I look soon to be the most initiated man in Europe," in the 1900s. And his goal was to collect all of these liturgies, basically the words and the written instructions for choreographies, right? And to try to figure out by collating them, which was the oldest and most accurate. Now, whether that ritual was one performed by Jesus, possibly at the Last Supper, or whether it harkened back to Egyptian roots or roots in India, he and others were uncertain. So I'm not quite sure about the Western aspect of what you said out there.
This is great. Maybe I set you up with something easy that you can knock down. So I really appreciate this. This is great.
Well, I'm not 100% sure myself, because these figures who are creating these orders and these groups are drawing from many, many, many sources. They're extremely eclectic. They're extremely syncretistic.
Skank, what are your thoughts?
My first thought in this kind of like, this concern in the modern period for a search for like the ritual that everything kind of like spawns out of. I'm kind of I generally kind of want to call that thesis into question just a little bit. The assumption that everything can be boiled down to like one specific thing. Like when I think of things like, say, like Joseph Campbell building on Carl Jung, talking about the monomyth and things like that. And I'm just like, that all presumes a unity, and every time I see them kind of like use that as a frame for describing a different story, I'm like, you are hacking and slashing and cutting, and you're not listening to the story you're proclaiming fits into the monomyth anymore, because you have to make it fit your model.
So you're not questioning that they were trying to do that, you're questioning whether they were right to try to do it?
Oh, well, my presumption is that that's a faulty presumption that's going to cause you to misread text from the start. I'm just more kind of asking the question of like, if that is that presumption towards like an myth or this search for like a primal unity, like how like kind of like culturally conditioned that presumption is.
Because it requires stripping off so many details, and often the details are extremely important. Often the details are what make the story come to life. Well, let's see. The writers that I tend to study the most, the Inklings, especially the core ones, Owen Barfield, C.S. Lewis, and J.R.R. Tolkien, developed this concept of true myth. So they weren't trying to find the myth. They thought that it had been revealed in the Gospels. So they thought that all other mythology and religions and imaginative stories written BC had inklings of the truth, that God was sort of using talented poets and storytellers to tell bits and pieces of the truth. So from that point of view, they might agree with an myth, but they would also say that you're onto something, that it's the culturally specific details that make each work of literature or each myth fascinating. that bring it to life. And indeed, they would say that's what makes the incarnation matter, is the specific localized details of, like, on a specific Thursday in the little town of Bethlehem. I'm sorry, I don't know what day of the week original Christmas is postulated to be.
Thursday. Yeah.
Right. But the point is that it became local, and that the details matter in the reign of Augustus Caesar in this particular town to this particular mother and so forth. So I think what you're saying is important.
And I mean, it's always struck me that that Darwin was being conscripted into like an ever increasing variety of fields. Maybe like Barfield in a way reminds me of like a Darwinian, like some of his views of like the history of language. Feels like it's got, if it's real, it does kind of boil down to an source of some variety, and it seems like a lot of them are pressing. A lot of these figures at this period are looking, they're trying to walk time backwards to something where there's an origin point, and they have competing, interesting and competing ways of trying to achieve that. Would you say so they can unwind evolution and then get back to the fish that first walked on land? Spiritually speaking,
did. Yeah. Tolkien, for one, didn't believe the myth of progress. He didn't think that things were necessarily getting better all the time. As a matter of fact, he said that there was a more glorious time in the past when elves and humans were taller, smarter, and better looking, and when the language was closer to its uncorrupted form, and that those degraded over time. Barfield is an interesting one because he's trying to balance both. Barfield fought fiercely against chronological snobbery. So he fought against the idea that something is better simply because it happened more recently, right? So just because we've come up with something to replace an idea or a technology of our ancestors does not mean it's therefore better. But he also taught at the core of his philosophy was this idea of the evolution of consciousness. Well, we, having been trained by Darwin, think that evolution means something getting better all the time, that through natural selection, it's weeding out the weaker members. That's not what Barfield meant by it, because that would be chronological snobbery. So what Barfield thought, this is a very simplified version of it, is that there were three phases of human consciousness. There was the ancient consciousness, which was original participation. And in that form of consciousness, we had a permeable self, to take Charles Taylor's term and put it back on Barfield. The idea that we were essentially in communion with spiritual beings, and that we humans saw this intense unity between what moderns divide into the literal and the metaphorical. That for the ancient mind, there wasn't this split between the literal and the metaphorical, that it was all story and it was all one thing. Then he said the human race lost that original participation, and now we're in an observer consciousness. We've lost this sense of unity and this sense of communion with nature, but we've gained individuality and more autonomy and free choice. So he's not saying that one is better than the other, but that each one has gains and each one has losses. But he is looking forward to a future time of final participation when the best of each of those previous phases is united. And human beings will again have a permeable consciousness where they're in touch with the other world and with nature in a really deep unitive way. And the world will be animate and vital again, but we will maintain individuality, autonomy, and free will. So that's a contrast to Charles Darwin for sure.
I like how that's so profound, but it also seems to just match onto just a raw sort of kind of like comedic, dramatic 3-act structure.
Doesn't it?
There's there's the original kind of like happiness, like the fall into some sort of calamity, and then the reunification with addition.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Nice.
Yeah. And so, okay. So drawing on that thread to talk, to go a bit forward in time and talk about the 1930s in England. And so we're at the eve of World War II. We've got figures like C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams writing each other. Their letters are crossing in the post.
Not quite. Not quite.
Oh, no, really?
No, yeah, and I keep going around correcting this myth. So C.S. Lewis wrote Williams a fan letter saying, "I just read your Place of the Lion and it blew my mind and I love it and I'm lending it to everybody." Williams wrote back 24 hours later and said, "I'm currently seeing your book, The Allegory of Love, through the press and admiring it, and I adore the fact that we both have this same view of romantic theology and the place of sexual love in Christian devotion. If you had delayed writing 24 hours, then our letters would have crossed in the mail. So my admiration for the staff work of the Omnipotence goes up day after day." I have a theory that Williams was telling a polite lie. He was not in the habit of writing fan letters. I don't think he ever would have started that correspondence had Lewis not reached out first. And Lewis immediately wrote back and said, "Hooray, it's great to hear from you. No, we do not agree about romantic theology and the place of sexual love. Let's debate about it." And Williams wrote back saying, "Great, I'm so glad we agree. Let's keep talking about this." And Williams is suave and urbane and ambiguous and roundabout, and Lewis is chop, chop, chop. These are the facts. This is the way it is. It's a beautiful microcosm of their relationship and their styles. So yes, but back to you, Matt. Sorry, 1930s. They're finally getting in touch, and you were going somewhere with that when I interrupted with well, actually.
This is so great. I think you've corrected every major point that I've attempted to make, and I'm really thrilled by that. No, I'm really thrilled by that.
I mean, this is so good for just kind of like the broader fact of there is the myth and there's what actually happened. And the more you look into anything, the more you realize, oh, nothing is the story that's told about how.
Are you sure you want to have scholars on your show? We're so didactic by definition.
Well, I mean, it's something that I've really appreciated about Charles Williams is, I mean, maybe selfishly in some respects, I identify with his like super high in openness, eclectic persuasion, where he tends to he tends to be that first person who says, "Actually, I think we're agreeing. I think we're saying something that's the same," even if he's the only person on the planet who is making that connection.
Right.
You know, and there's a winsomeness, there's a positivity. I don't know. He's the sort of person that you would, if you were a man, you'd want to be friends with him.
And if you were a woman, you'd be in love with him because they all were. Yeah. Yep. And some of the men were in love with him too.
And and as a I kind of feel like he's a transition figure from that turn of the century into this Inklings period. If we were to be so prosaic and to put these like incremental pinpoints in what was happening in the UK from like 1907 to 1937, if there was something, maybe it's not progression, but if you've got, at least he can walk us to this other group where there are eccentric figures that are kind of like there are eccentric figures like Williams who believe that maybe Anglicanism is the fullness of the sort of mysticism that I was looking for in the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn. Not everyone's going to agree with him on that. Other people are they follow different paths in that period. But I just wanted to see what your thoughts are on Williams. I know that he didn't, but lest you correct me on this one, because I know to put an addendum on this particular point, we aren't saying that he just dropped all of his esoteric community club membership.
He did not,
and then went straight into Orthodox Anglicanism.
Correct. But they were simultaneous. Yep. Yeah, he was a cradle Anglican.
Say that he started to just grow, like his interest in Christ being the fulfillment in a way of those sort of shadows that he was playing with and against earlier in life. I mean, he always identified as a Christian, but he got more and more hungry for playing outside of that, that strictly considered as, the esoteric sphere, and playing with something that feels much more closer to Christian mysticism broadly.
The best work on this is Aaron Rukma's book, Esotericism and Narrative, and he does a deep study of Williams's novels and investigates exactly that question that you're asking. And his answer is rather nuanced, and I believe it's correct. It's that Williams never became either more or less Christian or esoteric throughout his life. He had both of those intimately intertwined throughout his entire life. It did sometimes express differently. And by the last 6 years of Williams' life, it was expressing itself through the term coherence, which is the main word associated with Williams. It's his signature term. Interestingly, he didn't start using it until 1939. And we scholars have tended to anachronistically project it back across his works. But by 39, Williams was using this term, and it's a very Christian term. It's simply a translation of perichoresis, of the dance of the three persons of the Trinity, right? But Williams is using it to apply to human interactions as well. So he's using more Christian terminology to express it, and then he starts his own order of the coherence, which we Williams scholars debate over whether we think that was more Christian or more magical or both.
Can you just go like one step further on that coherence? Like what all is Williams think people are cohering with? Like how is he applying that beyond kind of classic Trinitarian language?
Yeah, thank you. He believes that we cohere in Christ to a very high degree, such that he ends one of his novels that one character calls another Messiah. And the girl's dad is like, wait, did you just call my daughter Messiah? Is she Messiah? And the saintly woman says, near enough. So Williams is sort of literalizing that idea of our identification with Christ and of the church's identification with the body of Christ. Furthermore, he says that we all cohere in each other so intensely that we can carry each other's burdens in a much more literal way than the church has previously taught. We usually interpret carry one another's burdens to mean pray for each other, listen sympathetically, say nice things, give a friend a hug. But he meant, no, whatever you're suffering, someone else can take that and carry it for you. So if one of you gets diagnosed with a terrible terminal illness, not only could I could take the fear of that from you and carry it instead, but I could even take the pain and the physical suffering, and I could maybe even take the illness for you and perhaps take the cancer or whatever, and maybe even die of it, and you could live longer than as a result. So Williams took this to a very literal extreme. And so one of the debates that I have with other scholars is whether that is strictly Christian or not. I find it a bit mechanistic, which makes me think that it's a bit more magical than Christian, that it's not as much relational as it is contractual. So that's why I think it's a bit more magical myself.
So do you have like, I don't know, like specific rituals for enabling coherence or something like that?
We're not sure.
Okay.
He wrote that the two parties should contract with each other verbally, that, I should say, I'm going to carry this for you. But he also writes that it works across time and space. So I could do it for someone who is deceased for centuries, or theoretically for someone not yet born. In practice, what he did is he assigned his disciples to carry each other's burdens, and even against their will. He would even say, you will carry this burden, whether you want to or not. And at least one sort of rebelled against this and found it spiritually abusive. But we don't really know whether there were any meditation practices, whether there was any liturgy. We also don't know whether there was an initiation ritual into the order of the coherence. One person writes in their diary, it went to an initiation at the order today, and that's all we have to go on. So we just really don't know.
I guess you're not supposed to write the mystery occult practices.
I mean, it's supposed to be secret, right?
They have good OPSEC.
I just find it so funny how British and modern it is. They're like, yeah, no, we're trying to reach like the magic, but also this magic is linguistically and legally mediated. Yes,
that's good. That's really good. Yeah. Can I go a step back to Matt Krotz when you were saying how he's like a transitional figure? I think he's fascinating because he has, shall we say, 1 foot in each of 3 worlds, which makes him an odd 3-legged beast. But hey, that's fine with me. He has a tri nature to him. He's a member of the Inklings, whom we think of as being like mere Christians, fantasists who write Aslan is Jesus, kind of straight up. We think of them as writing Christian allegory, which loses some nuance. But anyway, we think of them as a group of Christian writers, right? And then, as we know, he's this esotericist. So you could think of him along with Algernon Blackwood, Arthur Machen, William Butler Yeats, Aleister Crowley, Evelyn Underhill, writing weird fiction and straight up mystical works, some of whom also claim to be Christians, some of whom claim to be neo-pagans, etc. But then his third foot, as it were, is in the modernism. And he's good friends with people like T.S. Eliot, W.H. Auden, Christopher Fry, Philip Larkin, which a lot of the other Inklings were not, and a lot of them sort of mocked at that strain of literature that was going on. So you're right, he's a fascinating transitional figure, and he also sort of brings those spheres together.
So in a way, he's walking so that the Inklings could fly later, maybe, in a way.
That's
like
beautiful.
He's so eccentric, and he's a little early to the table, so
Yep.
that he can just kind of push things through. He's got nothing to lose, absolutely nothing to lose, and so that maybe some Tweedy, tenured
Oxford
people in
Dons.
Oxford's positions could play his game a bit later with the Space Trilogy, and then later with what do you think about that?
That's really, really good. Yes, That Hideous Strength is Williams all over it. The Notion Club Papers by Tolkien, which I think is an understudied text, highly influenced by Charles Williams, highly magical and mystical, and late Barfield perhaps, although he and Barfield only met a couple of times. And then also in maybe writers who came after as well.
Am I remembering correctly? I think some of my part might, helps understand kind of like his like weird, peculiar nature, that he was also like, compared to the other Inklings, had a much kind of like lower class background, like definitively like blue collar, doesn't actually have a degree to his name or anything like that.
That's right. Yep, that's correct. He was so poor that he was went to a charity kids school, and he only had a year and a half of university on scholarship. But even though he had a scholarship for tuition, his parents couldn't even afford like the books and the fees and things. Yep. So he didn't have a college degree.
Now I want to do some comparative between him and my boy Herman Melville for the tremendously talented yet like undereducated folks. But that's an aside for later. But
I wonder if there's some comparisons in the the kind of idiosyncrasies that they come up with. And Williams makes these startling assertions. Tell me if I don't know if this is similar with Melville. He makes these huge assertions of something wild and crazy that no one has ever thought of before, and then he'll say, "But of course, that's just natural and normal Christianity. Everyone already knows that." And I'm like, dude, no, nobody's ever thought of that. And maybe it's because his reading wasn't systematic. It wasn't filtered through the traditions of every professor teaching the same thing. Could be.
Dr. Sorina, what do you think about the some people will say that Freemason lodges, or these kind of that kind of structure that arises in the 19th century, it was another way for men of lower means, and in some orders, women too, to kind of build their own educational system in a way, if they had intense lifelong interests in languages and history and cross-cultural comparative studies. Joining these kind of clubs gave you access to something that you otherwise, there was only a few universities, and you probably were not going to them, but you could go to your local lodge, or eventually, I don't know, or join a Hermetic order or something.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, yep, that's precisely it.
How blue collar are the Masonic symbols?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and then the appeal then of these other orders was that they were gender equal. They were gender neutral. Women were allowed into the Order of the Golden Dawn, the Fellowship of the Rosy Cross, and they could rise up. They did rise up and hold the highest positions. There were women who took over these orders and ran them in England. Florence Farr, Annie Besant, and others, became essentially the high priestess in Anglia. And for blue collar men who couldn't get Oxbridge educations, for women who could study at Oxbridge but not get a degree, and who could not serve as clergy, right? Women couldn't serve as clergy in the Anglican or Catholic systems. I think these were highly appealing. They gave a sense of belonging. And then you're exactly right. It was like a higher education, because it would take anywhere from 5 to 10 years to master the system. And to master the system, you would be given a curriculum. You'd be given a pile of books and told, read these, study them, and memorize these charts and these lists and these languages. And then you would sit a written examination. And if you passed it, you would then go through a ritual and go into the next grade. And if you made it halfway up, you would then be allowed into the inner order, where there would be added a practical examination in practical magic. Were you able to do scrying? Could you interpret the tarot? Could you do divination by Enochian magic, and so forth? So it's basically your owls at Hogwarts. And so it replaced a university education and a traditional religious hierarchy for a lot of these people.
That's so important to think about.
It is.
That's such a key component, because otherwise, left with our prejudices today, I think we just tend to think, what the heck is happening in the 19th century and early 20th?
Right.
Like, everybody just wants to be a witch or a warlock. Like, sometimes they just want to, learn Aramaic and they
have
want
a
to
place
travel
to
to Tibet or
belong and have a place where they're respected and they have a title.
Yes.
But also, to come back to where we started, it's an answer to the Industrial Revolution and to the idea of certain elements of science and society. We're trying to say we are just matter, nothing else. There is no soul, there is no afterlife, there is no other world. And they're saying, no, there is another world. I've visited it in trance. I've been on the astral plane. I've seen these visions. And you get Rudolf Steiner saying, I have discovered an empirical scientific method of visiting and cataloging the other world, and anybody can learn it, and I will teach it to you. And it is as accurate a science as chemistry, biology, any other science. Because the human soul feels like there's something else. And if we're not allowed to go looking for it down certain paths, we're going to go down other paths.
Yeah. So other paths to button up the Inklings a bit, would they be considered another path? How would you characterize them? Just reclaiming pre-modern enchantment, or maybe the enchantment that was always along in parallel with modernism, as you said?
I think I would characterize each one of those gentlemen differently, because they were so varied. I mean, we have a devout Roman Catholic who is absolutely dedicated to being Orthodox and to following his religion, but, also thinks there might be these neutral beings that manifest themselves as fairies. So my latest podcast episode that came out yesterday was called Did Tolkien Believe in Fairies? You have to give it a listen to find out. And who then also wrote this late work in which people can visit other time periods through dreams, through lucid dreaming. Okay, and then you have C.S. Lewis, mere Christian, who's an Irish Protestant who doesn't hold with all these smells and bells, and wants to just keep it sort of simple, and poses himself as this beefy everyman, but is also drawing on the mythology of many, many different cultures, including pre-Christian and non-Christian cultures, including pagan myths and religion, and saying, no, but all of this points to the one story. And then you have Owen Barfield, the anthroposophist, who's following Rudolf Steiner's spiritual science, who has an extremely elaborate and complex spiritual system that involves visionary travels to the astral plane and then involves reincarnation. So, yeah, it varied from man to man. And then each of the other lesser inklings that we never talk about, each of them had his own unique take on it.
Yeah. It's fascinating, because I think a lot of us, we may tend to think of the Inklings as, I think Lewis identified as a dinosaur at some point in a letter.
Yes, he did in a lecture. Yep.
But I would almost want to take that from him, because I think they're hybrid beings in some way. I think of Tolkien's doing something very revolutionary in a way by inventing hobbits that are essentially his contemporary, like, Yorkshiremen, and then it's almost like the antidote to a Connecticut Yankee at King Arthur's court. It's like, I want to stick somebody that is eminently relatable to my contemporary audience into this mythical realm.
That's right.
But instead of having the hobbits finger wag and tell them how they need to,
It's not ironic.
be
It's not
Republicans,
satirical. It's not mocking. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you can only do that if you're a hybrid being of sorts. That he's
I
not
think that's
merely
right.
trying to recreate myth. He's actually trying to make it. He's trying to bridge it to his contemporary context, which is a
That's
lot
right.
harder to do.
Mm-hmm. And these men were not out of touch with their times. Like, okay, we say they were Oxford Dons, but they fought in the trenches of World
Yeah.
War One.
Mhm.
They saw it. They saw the roughest stuff of their times, and then some of them, their children or their students, or even some of them, again, fought in the Second World War. They knew what was going down. They were deeply familiar with the nihilism. Many of them went through periods of disbelief, incredible doubt, dark depression. They were real people who looked around and saw what was going on. They asked the same questions as their modernist contemporaries, and some of them offered different answers or looked to different bodies of previous literature to answer it. And some of their approaches were not all that different. So if we think of the high modernists, and what is T.S. Eliot doing but drawing from King Arthur to tell his great poem? Now, he tells it in a different form than Tolkien. He tells it in modern verse, but then so does Charles Williams in his last 2 volumes of Arthurian poetry. He uses modernist, largely free verse, although he also draws from the esoteric, but so does Eliot, right? Tarot cards and so forth come into the wasteland. So we try to divide these things up and say, like, oh, here's the modernists who were progressive and forward thinking, and here's the Inklings who were these dinosaur faux medievalists. These tidy packages, they usually cannot contain the multiplicity of the people they're trying to fold up in the neat boxes.
Yeah, I love that complexity.
Mhm.
And it's funny that by the way, I'm really enjoying your Tolkien series
Oh, thank you.
on your channel, and you're demonstrating. I mean, Tolkien's and that maybe the Middle Earth legendarium expanded. Just that idea of fantasy and the Arthuriad,
Yeah.
like whatever we want to call that, if there even is a label, it's as popular. Maybe it's as popular as it's ever been today.
I think so. I think it might even be growing as there are more and more adaptations in different media, and which hopefully sends more people back to the books. Yeah.
Yeah. So that must certainly speak to not merely wanting to visit dinosaurs in zoos. It probably speaks to something more like Malcolm Geet himself embodies, I think, which is to continue to carry that tradition into the present and into the future in some way. And I think it strikes me as we do the final segment here, which is this is the most dangerous segment of all. Well, maybe I don't know. We'll see what kind of slings and arrows come our way on this. But like, how are people navigating a world that is re-enchanting itself without our permission, perhaps even in a way? Maybe some could argue in 1960s Birmingham, you could read The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and you would be fighting off modernism in some ways, like what you were learning in public school, and you were finding a little paracosm that you could play within that allowed you to still have imagination and joy. I'm already doing that. I'm already doing the bad thing of pitting them against each other. I apologize, but today it feels like that you don't read someone like you don't read the Inklings, you don't read Arthur today in the year of our Lord 2026, and feel that you're trying to push back a tide of materialism and mere materialism. I think some have said that there's almost too much mythology happening right now, and it's more about paring back to what you think is the good, the true, the beautiful, mythologically speaking. That's the world I think I find myself in. I don't know about you, and I would like to hear. Please feel free to completely toss this table setting out the window if you would so desire.
I like it. I'm pondering it. Can I try to say some of it back to you to make sure I'm following, and then we
Yes.
can go with it. So are you saying we've been re-enchanted, like it worked? We love these stories. They've become part of our popular mythology. And we'll just even say in American consciousness. And we've got so many superhero movies, and we've got so many mythologies and so many games that are set in fantasy worlds. Is our problem that we're not even sure what's real anymore?
That sounds like a fruitful avenue to walk down.
Yeah, go ahead if you want to say more while I'm getting my thoughts in order.
I'll just throw another thing out there as far as the idea of like so many stories that there's so much that we're not sure what's real anymore. Like my book club recently, we read through the Mabinogion, and I was just really, really struck by this. Is at the same time I'm kind of trying to process different like news stories about like AI hallucinations, deep fakes, and stuff like that. And it was just kind of shocking to me how relevant all of the different like dreamlike states, how relevant the Mabinogion is today, considering our kind of like internet induced image concerns. It was wild.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. Yeah, we are, perhaps it has worked. Perhaps we are re-enchanted. I don't think you maybe would find as many hardcore total materialists, like scientistic materialists now as maybe you would 100 years ago. So maybe that has succeeded. I think the majority of people that we bump into believe in some kind of other world, some sort of spirits, deities, maybe believe in the human soul. That's my suspicion. I haven't seen the polling for like a decade or something. I know a lot more people are clicking none when asked, what is your religion? But that doesn't mean that they're purely materialists by any means. I think the majority of people in America right now think they have a soul, think there's some kind of God, think there's some sort of spirits. And there may even be a return to some sort of animism as well, more respect for the natural world and the personhood, maybe lesser personhood of animals and even lesser personhood of trees and other growing things, perhaps. I think there's a lot more of that consciousness. So when I get up in the morning and sit down at my computer to write or to record a podcast episode, I do not feel like my job is to try to re-enchant people. So I think you're right there. I think my job is to try to stem the tide of hatred. I think the main problem that we are facing in the year of our Lord 2026 in the United States, and from what I hear from relatives and friends abroad, is the bitter rage at those who think differently. And that we've decided that other ordinary persons of our same sort of social class, education, background, etc., are the enemy because they think differently on some core point about law and order, or about human sexuality, or about the beginnings and ends of life, or about the wielding of power. Some of these core questions, right, that are absolutely timeless and that every culture needs to wrestle with and needs to decide, are we going to be totalitarian on these questions? Or are we going to be pluralistic on these questions? But as I keep writing on my Substack, and as I've said in my podcast a little, I think that one of the bitter problems right now in the United States is we've decided we don't want to be pluralistic anymore. Is that other people are not allowed to think differently. For instance, I used the word civilization in a conversation last week and got my head absolutely bit off, being like, you're a white supremacist, you're being a tool of empire if you use that word civilization, like you're prejudiced against indigenous cultures. And I was like, whoa, you didn't ask me what I meant by civilization. I didn't get a chance to answer. But what I meant by civilization was essentially kindness, cooperation, community, and storytelling. And like, that doesn't require capitalism. That doesn't even require electricity to have that. So that could be either indigenous communities, or it could be little local neighborhoods in urban, rural, or suburban settings. Let's say the entire power grid goes down and there's no more internet and there's no more food supply chain, which could happen in a couple of years. We can still have pockets of civilization where people get together to read to each other off of paper books or to tell each other stories from the ancestors. So I think you are exactly right that the challenge is a different one now than was facing the proto-Inklings 100 years ago.
to get practical to those, the core audience listening to this, a lot of our friends in this particular internet community are very aware of the rising popularity of Eastern Orthodoxy.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think this dovetails super nicely into this overall trend. I think it's a good data point that if I were incorrect, I would not expect to see Protestantism having virtually nothing to give in the area of riz or vibes or aura or these kind of once magical terms now termed Zoomer lingo.
Right.
In this reenchanted space. Protestantism has virtually nothing to provide on that front. At least that's the consensus.
With two important exceptions in opposite directions, and one is Anglicanism. That's also seeing a great resurgence, and that's the American Anglican Church. And then the other is the sort of non-denominational spin-offs of Southern Baptists, like the super conservative MAGA churches. Those are growing wildly. Those are growing wildly. And I don't know if they're offering enchantment so much as they're offering purpose and community, and they're offering an enemy to fight against. They're saying, this is the enemy. We need to fight this enemy. We need to destroy them at any cost. And that mobilizes, right? That mobilizes people. Yeah. And you're muted again, Matt Kratz, just so you know. It's on the software, not the hardware.
Oh my gosh.
Still there. Still muted.
How many mute buttons do you have, dude?
I'm sure it's on the software, not the hardware. There you go.
There you go. No, it's user error.
You also referenced AI at the beginning of this third half of the show. And when I talk about civilization, I think I also have in mind handmade beautiful objects and human-made beautiful stories, poetry, etc. So whether we're talking crafts or practical survival objects, or whether we're talking about stories, poems, essays, everything that's made in which every word is lovingly chosen by a human mind without the mediation of a machine, I think that's what we need to survive as a flourishing human race. I'm not a Luddite. I love technology and think that it can be deployed for great purposes. But what we're calling AI right now, which isn't AI, what we're calling AI right now has not been developed thoughtfully and has not been rolled out in a thoughtful and careful manner and is doing enormous harm. I don't think it's an entirely unprecedented thing in the history of the human race. I think it's always been the case that the majority of humans just have to labor to survive and don't necessarily have intellectual leisure. And there's always going to be just like from 1% to 3% who are the great artists and the great creators of their generation. That's a human reality. It's not elitism. Only a certain number of people have the commitment and the drive to become the best in their field, whether it's painting or poetry or whatever. And the rest of people tend to find shortcuts just, to get by. And they're often laboring as pawns or just as tools of some larger power. And I'm afraid that what we're doing with LLMs, et cetera, is really just making the conditions of the laborers worse, and is maybe driving a wedge between those who work and those who create. And I think it's going to be harder and harder for the creators to make those decisions every single day, not to outsource stages of the process, because it's so easy to do that.
I'm just thinking of I'm no stranger to using AI to give visual representation to a goofy meme that I've thought up. But also that's the sort of thing where learning to draw is cheap. It's really, really cheap. And so giving you sort of an easy button is almost because it's not hard to dedicate yourself to building a simple skill like that.
But it takes a certain type of mental energy that is hard to summon and that is hard to focus. And if we were just
No,
using the
100%
robots
agree with that.
for the things they're supposed to be used for, which is like massive data crunching and searches on an enormous scale and categorizing things. I mean, there are things that they are so good at, and they would actually help us to be better creators because we could outsource that boring stuff that just takes too long on a big scale. It's if we could use them as an abacus on steroids, right? And a search engine on steroids and use but we have to be very, very thoughtful about how we use these tools. And we, as a species right now, are not. Which is why Malcolm Geit's beautiful poem has been called The Antidote to AI Slop. And his poem, Galahad and the Grail, which is this gorgeous handcrafted product. Now, of course, the book is being printed en masse, but he wrote the poetry by hand. And then his artist created these beautiful woodcuts and line drawings by hand. And the Rabbit Room crafted a beautiful volume. It has sold out, and it is the #1 best-selling poem on the planet. And I think it's because of everything we've talked about today. We want something that was made lovingly by hand, where the poet and the artist each took that difficult mental energy and focused it for decades to create something beautiful. But it's also a non-ironic poem using an ancient meter and being very straightforward about saying there are things like chivalry and valor and honor and community and companionship. And it's sort of stripping away all this hatred and fury that we're boiling in every day. That was a mixed metaphor.
In a way, it strikes me that the AI has kind of saved us from a certain materialism where we thought that art was the artifact, the result of that work, like the art was what was produced at the other end of the work. And I think we tend to, because we never knew of another being or process or technology or angel or demon that could produce an artifact before. So there's something kind of funny and ironic about AI being something that can create an artifact without how we would think of as work, as you just very well elucidated.
Your 10
so
cents
now,
hours. Yeah.
So now we have art has to have some intangible quality, something that you can't look at or touch or smell or see.
That's so
in order
good.
to make it art.
Wow. And we have to look before the product and say, how did the product come to be and from whom did this product issue? That's really, really good. Thank you. I'm going to
from which spirit did it arise? Yeah, in a way. And then from that you can say all kinds of things about the artifact as a result, like that, but it's the spirit that gives it that context in a way. And and Malcolm Geit's, it is Geit.
Yes, it is.
It's not,
it rhymes with white. It rhymes with might.
Well, yeah, he's a great example of that. And I've heard people talking about, I mean, just like he mentioned to you that it's in a way it's meant to be read aloud.
It is.
And there's an incredible enchantment energy to, if we could say, to reading poetry aloud with others. And it seems to be that a lot of people are exploring that. They're not just thinking about it as a book, but they're thinking about it as an opportunity to it's almost there's a ritual inclusion act of inviting listeners and readers into the same room together to experience something that that only people can embody.
Isn't that fascinating? Neat. Yeah.
Well, that was a great conversation.
We didn't do too much about Crowley, but I hope we hit the main points that you wanted.
Yes,
we can always do it again.
Well, I want to thank you so much, Dr. Higgins, for hanging out with us.
Thank you.
And thank you, Skank, for being a part of this too.
Thank you for inviting me.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Pleasure.
Yeah, this will be posted soon. For those of you in the future who are already watching this, you know exactly when it's being posted. And
Transcending
we hope
time and space.
Yeah. We've got details about Dr. Higgins's works below this video in the description. So please feel free to check those out. And anything that you've got coming up that you want to promote? And do you have any online courses that you expect to be?
I'm trying to decide. I taught an online course on The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe last fall, and so I'd love to just follow that up and do one volume of Narnia each year. But I would also love to begin taking interested readers through Charles Williams' novels. So as soon as I can fit that into my life and my navigating the new financial and political landscape as a freelancer, then I hope to offer some more online courses soon. So yeah, people can find me on social media or on my YouTube at Dr. Sorina Higgins or at Wordhoard, WYRDHOARD, and reach out. And if anyone's interested in a class on Charles Williams, yeah, absolutely. I'll try to fit that in as soon as possible.
Fantastic. Well, thank you again. And thank you, everybody, for listening, and hope to see you again on this channel. We'll be having more content like this.